Are we ready to start the meeting? Call the meeting to order at 7 o'clock. Everybody stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic
for which it stands,
one nation,
under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Rory, do we have any public comment?
No.
Okay. So the next item is the nonprofit assessment. Brian, did you guys come up with anything on that? I know we were having Rich look into that.
Yes, Madam Chairman. It's Brian Leclerc from the Town Attorney's Office. You have the ability by ordinance to exempt property that is leased to charitable, religious, or nonprofit organizations under 12-81 of the statute. That's one of the exemptions. In addition to what is already exempt, real property that is owned or personal property that is owned by the charitable, scientific, or educational organization. They're already exempted upon application to the town, but by ordinance, you can extend those exemptions to leased property by those not-for-profits. So you'd have to come up with a separate ordinance. We would have to draft one if that's your intention, to include leased property as well.
Is that what we wanted to do? I didn't think that was that part of it, Rory?
Again, that's kind of up to you guys. You know, it was all based around the one, and the assessor Joe Kuziak is on call as well, so he can provide any information. But
yeah, this is Joe, the assessor. You guys can do what you want, but if the landlord is renting to a charitable organization and collecting rent like any other landlord, do you want that landlord to be exempt for that building?
He's collecting rent. He's not giving any deal. He's just putting his normal rent out there, and whether we're going to collect tax from him on the property.
Right, the landlord.
Right.
Right, but he's collecting rent like any other landlord. Do you want that building to be exempt? That's the question that I'm throwing out to the committee to make them aware of this, what they're trying to do here. But most of the buildings that are owned by a charity, they're exempt anyway. I'm unaware of any building that's being leased to a church or a charity. The whole building, and it does say like that portion, so it's up to you. I just wanted to point that out to you people. Okay,
thank you. You said you currently don't know of anywhere that situation exists. Do we know, is there a history of nonprofit, like the Boys and Girls Club being in the basement of the community center? Let's just say that was a private building. Do we have a list of nonprofits, religious organizations that would benefit from this? I mean, I'm always going to be in favor of structuring things that are going to make businesses that otherwise wouldn't be as kind to nonprofits have some, do something to help them out. But the way that was kind of worded makes it seem like they're not going to be doing anything to help. This is going to help the owner of the building. Is that something worth doing under this? Is this a vehicle for that?
Yeah, if he was showing something as under market value, and he was giving that charitable group a break, then I would argue that maybe the right thing to do is to share some of that with that person. But if it's at market value, I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with Bob in that wording of it. If they're going to be doing a favor, then I like to be able to help them out, compensate them, give them incentive for reaching out to nonprofits and doing that. If they're taking in the exact same amount of profit otherwise, I don't really see the benefit. If anything's, something, if there's some other cost incurred by the nonprofit to the town, if there was some way to help the nonprofit out directly with that, as we do when they own the building. So are there any circumstances we can come up with, any examples somebody could kind of educate me on where this would benefit somebody other than the direct property owner?
This is Joe, the assessor. I'm just unaware of any at this point in time. However, I'd be more than happy to help write the ordinance with the town attorney. Currently, as I believe, there's only one, maybe two towns that have employed this statute in their towns. I'm just very unaware of any towns that has implemented this, but again, I'll be more than happy to help the town attorney write this ordinance if that's, what you want, and you can set the parameters and we'll set it up for you.
One way, Madam Chairman, if I may, Brian Leclerc, and that was just Joe Kuziak speaking, just so we can all identify under the executive order rules. One way it could apply is if it's personal property. If you have a not-for-profit that has a fleet of buses or a fleet of vehicles, Meals on Wheels vehicles, assuming that's a not-for-profit, or if it's a church with church buses and they lease the vehicles. As you know, your property taxes are a component of the lease payment that you have to pay every month. I don't know whether we even have any of those in Seymour that would fall into that have lease vehicles.
Brian, I did check some of the churches, and if the vehicle's owned by the church itself, we have been exempting them.
Okay.
Okay, I'll start identifying myself. Thank you, Brian. Selectman Rob Van Hagen. So then, again, I think this is going to go to, I want to benefit. I want there to be an incentive for business owners, for property owners to help out nonprofits. Don't know that this would be a structure to do that currently. So again, if any examples can be brought forward, I'm definitely willing to move around on this one.
This is like about Finley. I'm in this boat, and that I don't want to over make this too over complex either, right?
Right.
So I did, like I said, if there was a way that we could tell if they were on a market value rental to that person, then. But I think that'd be a lot of work, and it probably wouldn't be worth it at the end of the day.
Could that be written into the ordinance? Let's say a percentage if a property owner is going to lease to a nonprofit at, let's say, 80% of market value, that would then kick in the tax exemption, but anything above that, no?
Well, this way the statute's written, it's an outright exemption under 1281/58. Property leased to a charitable, religious, or not-profit organization. Subject to authorization of exemption by ordinance, any real or personal property leased to a charitable, religious, or nonprofit exempt from taxation for federal income tax purposes, provided such property is used exclusively for purposes of the charitable, religious, or nonprofit organization. So it makes a whole exemption, a total exemption. It doesn't talk about a partial exemption.
Could we do a partial exemption? Do we have to? Is that possible? And the only thing that makes me think about that is just having looked at the the fire department. The point system leads to 50, 75, 100% of exemption based on how many points they accumulate.
Mm-hmm.
We could take a look at that, whether we can do that by ordinance, making a partial exemption if that's how you want to proceed.
Yeah, I'd like to incentivize where if it's at market value, there's nothing. But if you're going to lease to a nonprofit at a discount, the incentive is you'll have exemption on taxes.
The question is, how will you know? I guess just to play the devil's advocate, how are you going to know if I'm a landlord that I'm leasing at a quote unquote discount to that charity?
I would, then I'd have to look at this, but market rates, I mean, you know what apartments go for. I'm sure there's economic resources to find what square footage, what amenities should go for what. I mean, it'd be a ballpark. It'd have to be something that's agreed upon.
Yeah.
My first floor is worth $10,000 a month, and the fact that I'm renting it for $1,000 a month is, you know, this huge deal.
Yeah, this is Joe, the assessor. It doesn't say what rents the guy's getting. All it's saying is if you're leasing it to a charitable, it will be exempt. Whether or not he's collecting rents, that's irrelevant.
Right. That's what I have to wrestle with here a little bit. The way it's written, it's a total exemption. The property is totally exempt if you lease it to a not-for-profit.
Exclusively.
I was just gonna say that exclusively. I think that's the word that I think keep skipping over, just like about Finley. That's probably the most important piece. So if it was strictly used for that purpose only, I guess that would be the main, the main item to stick on versus I think what we were, and Rob, I'm like you, I was trying to find out a way, if there was a way to make it simpler or give them the benefit, but I think it would be more of a burden than a.
This is Joe, the assessor. If I can think of one, I'll convey it to Rory. But right now, I just can't think of any situation that we have in town.
Yeah. Okay.
This is Selectwoman Amory Giannis. What about the old bank building? I know we have Project Purple in there, and I know the Valley Indy is in there. Right? Are those all non-for-profit?
No, nobody in there has filed with me. And even if they did, it would probably be the personal property that would be exempt, not the building itself.
I guess the question was to the chairman, chairwoman.
Sorry.
What if you have a building like that, the old bank, Seymour Trust, full of not-for-profits? Therefore, if the entire building is leased to nonprofit organization or organizations, would it be exempt under this, assuming you passed an ordinance doing that? And I guess your response is no one in that building has asked for non-exempt treatment on their personal property right now, correct? Tax-exempt treatment, correct?
Correct.
Would it be Amory Giannis, would it be possible for them without writing one to say for the property, like the building owner can rent it or ask for the tax exempt? Would it be possible for the individual companies inside that business to do that?
Under the ordinance, this Brian Leclerc, under your ordinance would have to follow the statute, and the statute makes the property itself exempt from taxation. If that's your question. Something that the
Their
landlord
personal
would get.
property or the building property?
Well, I thought we're talking about real estate. Personal property is a different issue. Personal property, if you could pass, as I indicated, it may apply to leased vehicles or other leased personal property, perhaps a photocopier, any office equipment that you are leasing. If you pass an ordinance, you can also exempt personal property leased by that organization, the charitable, religious, or nonprofit organization.
Well, this is Joe, the assessor. That'll be like IBM leasing would be exempt for that copier, not the tenant. The tenant's already exempt for his equipment.
So really then all this is doing is helping the landlord.
Correct.
Correct.
Which is why if it's going to incentivize them to be nicer to nonprofits to get that benefit, awesome. But if it's not.
And that was Selectman Van Agen speaking again.
Yes, it was. As long as you like the idea. If you didn't, it was Selectman Phil.
It's Brian Leclerc. I guess to go on that thought of the chairman, jump off on that thought. If there was a pass-through by the property owner, that would make one thing. I think that's what Selectman Van Agen is speaking about. If there was a pass-through of the savings, meaning if the rent was $10 a square foot plus property taxes for the square foot. That's one thing, but the way this is written, it is a tax exemption for the owner of the property, and regardless of whether there's an explicit pass-through in the lease, written in that lease for the real estate or the real property anyways. As to personal property, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, not mistaken, the rental payments would include personal property taxes in them for office equipment like a vehicle lease. I know when you lease a car, typically you are also responsible for your property taxes on that vehicle as well.
Well, okay. Well, the leasing company, if you're renting a car, leasing a car from Toyota Leasing, Toyota Leasing is responsible for the bill. However, there's a private agreement between Toyota Leasing and you, which makes you, the lessee, responsible for taxes. There's also case law on that the assessor does not get involved with private leases. In other words, between you, Toyota Lease and you, it doesn't matter who's paying the taxes. All we know is the person responsible for the taxes would be Toyota Leasing.
Correct. Whatever deal I made with Toyota Leasing in that example.
Right. I don't get involved with that. It's case law. Correct.
And the same would apply, I guess, with a photocopier or something like that that you may be leasing.
Right. Now, that's under this ordinance 1281-58. Yeah, if you want to say IBM Leasing leases a copier to you and you want to make a local ordinance where that copier will be exempt for IBM Leasing, yeah. Again, I don't see much of this going on, but sure, that's possible.
All right, so this is Selectman Bob Finley. To get off the dime, what do you think our next action should be? Brian.
Well, it's Brian Leclerc. We can draft an ordinance exempting such personal and real property, and it can come back to you at your next meeting. I can take a look at the partial exemption versus 100% exemption. I don't know that that's going to work. My first thought is I don't think so, because the statute talks about a total exemption of the property, not a proportionate exemption. But we could surely draft the ordinance, and you can bring it to the board for further discussion or review. And I guess Joe really can't run numbers because we don't truly know how many people this would affect, if any, right now. If there are any real properties that he's aware of with not-for-profits in them, there may be none right now that are wholly occupied by a not-for-profit, not owned by the not-for-profit.
Yeah, the only thing we could try and do is create a use case or something that looks at one of our non-for-profits in town, and if this actually would have happened, what would it turn into? Otherwise, I think at this point, we should just go along the lines of, having you write the ordinance as is, and then we'll get a shot to read it before we're going to move on with that as well. So if anything comes out of it by then we can give you feedback.
Sure,
Yeah.
we can do that.
This is Selectwoman Draganis. Brian, you'll work with Joe Kuziak on writing the ordinance?
Yes, we will.
Yes, not a problem.
Okay. I would like to see that done and then have it for the board to review at our October meeting, hopefully.
Absolutely.
Great.
And, this is Selectman Bob Finley. Joe, did you have any recommendations, any thoughts? Anything we're missing? Besides what you've already told us. Besides what you've already told us, did you have any thoughts, any recommendations? Any other?
Regarding, are you talking to me, the assessor?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Regarding 1281-58?
Yeah. Yep.
I'm going to, I'll probably be writing this with Brian Leclerc, but I'm thinking of all kind of scenarios as we're talking now. What if the landlord starts leasing to a profitable tenant? We got to be made aware of that, and maybe there'll be a penalty if they don't inform us, things along those nature. But like I said, I'll try and find if we have such a situation in town. And even if we don't, we can still write up something and propose it to the board, see what they think.
Yeah, because the actual process has got to be a little bit difficult, because you would have to know that that non-for-profit had left the property and somebody else went in there. So how do you keep track of all that?
Well, that's going to be the landlord's responsibility, and if he doesn't do what he's supposed to do, then we would put in penalties into the local ordinance.
Yeah, we would have to, it's Brian Leclerc, we would have to draft this in consultation with Joe, with some type of a certification, perhaps an annual certification or a biannual certification by the landlord, much like with the senior tax relief or any elderly tax relief or circuit breaker, any of those programs. There has to be some way to keep track of these.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you, Joe.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you, Joe. Okay.
You're welcome. Am I off? Am I done?
Yes, you
Yeah,
are.
you're all set.
Okay.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
My pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
So next one, item number 5, is the firefighters abatement. We have Fire Commissioner Clay Jurgens on with us. So Clay, we had a lot of questions in regarding this. Can you just give the board a little bit of background on this? I think what we really wanted to ask the question was, and Rob and Bob, correct me if I'm wrong on this, you had set forth an abatement committee. And we had a question on what the abatement committee was for, right guys?
Yes.
Clay Jurgens speaking. When the abatement program was written in 2001, there's a list of membership requirements, accountability, an awards committee, and it was the whole package of how your abatement was calculated as to what you would receive for an abatement at the end of the year. And in that section, it was, and I can provide this to you, I gotta find it here.
And I just want to add that I believe this was included in your packet for this meeting. Yeah, you should all have this.
It says the fire department tax abatement program eligibility requirements.
So the commissioners requesting the tax abatement committee be charged with reviewing the program for updates and changes.
Correct. And Clay Jurgens speaking, and the reason for that is the town has not been following the abatement program to take it off personal property. What they had changed 2 years ago, they changed it and were giving it as wages, taking out taxes on it and giving you a W-2 form at the end of the year. And if the town is going to do that, we're not following the tax abatement and the ordinance program that we have in place. Therefore, I requested we either review this or we fix.
Can you give us a little bit more detail on that, Clay? So you're not getting an abatement, you're getting a W-2 form and not an abatement.
Yes. 2 years ago, I was called to a meeting with the first selectman and I believe Doug Thomas and Tony Caserta. And I was informed that they would no longer be taking it off of our property taxes, that there was an IRS memo that had come out and they provided to us that said that they could no longer do that and that it would be, therefore, it would be wages, and it generated paperwork where every firefighter that was eligible had to turn in a W-9 and come up with deductions just as if you were an employee of the town. And that's what's been happening for the last 2 years.
I'm going to defer to Rory on this one. Rory, you have any more information on this one, or Brian? Selectwoman Draganis.
This is Rory. Not too many specifics. My only understanding of it is that it was guided by the auditors. They took issue with the way that we had been conducting the abatements, and the new method was per their recommendation. I don't know why specifically, but it was driven by them.
Madam Chairman, Brian Leclerc, I'm not aware of that. We can certainly look into that and explore it. It
Because
was my
go ahead.
no,
Yeah, this
it was also
Go ahead, Brian.
it was my understanding you also wanted to look at the lifetime exemption once these 25
We
years.
want
is
to look
finished.
yes. Sorry, Selectwoman Draganis. You're right. We want to look at that too. We want to get into that one as well. But maybe we make a side note to look at this tax abatement. Selectman Van Egan.
Selectman Van Hagen here. Okay, really quick. Do you know, was the abatement being followed, not the abatement, was the amount being followed just coming through a different means and a different system? Was your point system still being used appropriately so that people were getting what they deserved? It just came through a different means?
Clay Jurgen speaking. Yes, that is correct. The point system was still generated through the tax abatement program and a program that we used to record and track that over the year. And both companies, both Great Hill and Citizens, supplied the list of people who were eligible and the amounts to the commissioners, which we reviewed and then turned into the Board of Selectmen.
Okay, so if we were to, let's say, make this the easiest thing for everyone, we'd keep the point system, and then we would just make it official that it goes through the what was recommended by the auditors. But that's what you're asking us to do, is make these instructions now adhere to what is actually happening in reality.
Clay Jurgens, you have an ordinance that is in place that says that these particular points and payouts of monetary funds, your ordinance says that they will be applied to personal property first, which you are not doing. You are giving them out as wages, and you are taking taxes out of them so that the individuals are not getting the true tax break or benefit that they're entitled to by the ordinance.
Okay, so that's what I wanted to get to, is that they're not getting the same number at the end. This wasn't a different route to the same end. This was literally coming out different.
That is correct.
Okay, so, I mean, for that purpose, from what I'm seeing, yeah, I would be very in favor of trying to get this into alignment so that we can get it as it should be, and that's a review of this entire system. Is that what I understand?
Correct. And according to the tax abatement, that the part that I provided to you, and it says in there, the committee shall be made up of 7 members. It's listed right in there as to who those members of that committee shall be to review this program.
Chief, not elected. Well.
Correct. And that's why I brought it back and I worded it the way I did, was so that that committee could be empowered to either make changes to this program or make recommendations to follow what we have in place.
Okay.
I believe it's on the top of the second page.
Yeah.
This is like about Finley. Clay, was this communicated to you when it happened? Was in the proper way? I mean, when we were audited, did they bring it to you, communicate it to you that we had to make these changes? Or were you blindsided? Because I'm thinking about you, it sounds like you were blindsided that it was going to be personal, it was going to be taxed, and it was going to be lower than the original amount.
Clay Jurgens, we were blindsided to the fact that the change happened after we had submitted our list of people who were eligible for monetary funds or tax abatement. And shortly after that, I was called into the first selectman's office and I was told that that's not the way it would be handled. It would be wages. And I said, well, we're not following it. And I was told that's the way it's going to be. And I said, okay, that's not right. And we went from there. And for this year and last year, that's what we did. And it came down to everybody in the fire department and EMS all had to take and turn in W-9s and fill out all the paperwork as if you were a new hiree for the town.
This is Selectwoman Draganis. So are you saying you guys more or less get a check?
That is correct.
So you don't get an abatement at all?
Correct. They hand my abatement, my funds were $1,000, which by that was what I was entitled to. I received a check from the town of Seymour for a certain amount with the taxes removed. And at the end of the year, I will receive a W-2 as if I was an employee of the town. So there's nothing coming off of the personal property, my home, anything like that. Nothing. No, not following the tax abatement program whatsoever.
This is Selectman Van Hagen. And let's say you were eligible for the full $1,000. You didn't get $1,000. You got that minus taxes.
That is correct.
Oh, Chloe's not happy about that.
I was saying, does Deputy Select Chloe want to talk on that?
Dog is not happy. Chloe, stop.
See, Clay, there you got a very audible support.
Excellent.
Selectman Van Hagen speaking.
Yeah.
So what would be the next step here, Brian? Would it be assembling this committee, or Rory, would it be assembling this committee to review things?
Where is this this committee is under the ordinance already?
Yes.
It is.
Yeah.
I didn't, so it is in the packet for this meeting was the fire department's internal abatement policy document.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Where the committee is listed. After reviewing the ordinance, all of the references in the ordinance are to, it just says the fire commissioners and the board of either trustees or directors for the ambulance association.
Yeah, that committee is not actually, it's Brian Leclerc, it's not actually in your ordinance. It is a fire department committee they've set up for their point system and to administer the program. Your ordinance is a little bit different. It doesn't call for a committee. It's something you can do without a committee, frankly.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
And I guess we could take a look. I will look. It's Brian Leclerc still speaking. I'll take a look at the tax issue that Mr. Juergens raised and the rationale behind the auditors doing that, number one. And one thing, I can also take a look at expanding this, as was suggested, to those with 25 plus years of service, which I think Mr. Juergens raised as well, because that was a change made a couple of years ago to these statutes, allowing that. Once you have 20, yeah, I'm sorry.
Sorry. Selectwoman Draganis here. We have a ordinance that we want to look at, put into place for the 25-65. But we want to keep it separate. I think these are two separate issues: the abatement committee and the fact that there really is no abatement being given.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one ordinance, and that's one thing that really has to be looked at, along as this why they're not getting their abatement, they're getting paid. And then the 65-20, the 62-25, whatever it is, that's a separate ordinance. Two separate issues.
Okay.
Do we have any, Madam Chairman, it's Brian Leclerc, maybe Mr. Jurgens knows, because I know you're going to ask this question, one of you, at either tonight or at the next meeting. How many firefighters, because I know you can't speak for the EMS men and women, how many firefighters would be eligible who have no longer are accumulating any points, but they did have their 25 years of service and they're over that 65 age where they would now become eligible for this?
I don't have Clay Jurgens speaking, I don't have a definite number, but I think, well, we have certain people that are over the age of 65 with well over 25 years of service that are staying on as active people simply because it's the only way they can get a tax abatement. They're still actively working as a firefighter in whatever capacity they can. These people would probably remove themselves from active roles and be eligible under this part, which we thought would have been added to our tax abatement program. And it would just be the list would be accumulated. They would be in that list.
You think a dozen, 2 dozen?
I would say right now, there's less than 20. Could be up to that number with the number of individuals in both companies that are between 65 and, well, some of them are up in their high 70s that are still participating, that would definitely stop participating if they were eligible for it. And one of the things that we included at the request of for selectmen was that you had to take and maintain some level of activity with each of the fire companies in town to be eligible for this. This way we could say that, and Kurt Miller was concerned that if somebody moved to California that we would be paying them $1,000 or as an abatement, and they're in California and no longer doing anything of value towards the town of Seymour. So that's why we included that you had to have some kind of activity with either one of the fire companies. That was in the original letter that I had sent.
Okay. Selectman Van Hagen, just to get back, I want to circle back to the abatement issue in of itself. And we glazed over this, and I think it's kind of one of the more important points. The awards committee, that is the responsibility of overseeing the policies and effectiveness of the program. Did I understand Brian correct? And I think Bob said it too, that that's not ordinance. So could you, Clay, not call that, or the fire chiefs call that, of which first selectman would be a member. He's one of the members, but that does not need to be called by the Board of Selectmen or the Ordinance Committee, because that's not part of ordinance. Do I understand that correctly?
It's Brian Leclerc. The awards committee is not established under the ordinance. It's established under the Seymour Fire Department program that they have in effect. They've come up with a point program for this, rather than every firefighter who's a member of the department automatically getting the abatement. They have a point system based upon rank, number of calls, all that stuff. You've seen that, and that's what that committee was established under, that as opposed to under the ordinance itself, which doesn't mention that, I don't believe.
And Mr. Jurgens, you're asking for that committee to be formed to review the process, to see where it goes, but ideally back to an abatement program. But how does that get called for? How does that get formed? We don't need to do that, do we? The fire department can do that themselves.
Yeah, it's Brian Leclerc. Under the ordinance 6-38, volunteers are eligible, providing the volunteer meets appropriate standards set forth in a point system approved and adopted by the Board of Fire Commissioners and the Board of Trustees of the Ambulance Association, and then later ratified by the Board of Selectmen.
Clay Jurgens, that is correct. That is the 4-page document that I gave you on how all of those points are accumulated That's how we've been working since 2001 on establishing what you are eligible for as a member of the fire department or the ambulance corps.
So it's Brian Leclerc again. So I think what you're talking about is not necessarily amending that. I mean, the Board of Fire Commissioners could do that based upon the committee. I think we have a different discussion here. Number one, is it being done properly based upon what we've been told tonight? And number two, we can expand it to those with 25 more years by ordinance. We'd have to put that in the ordinance itself. That'd be different than the rules that the group itself has for administering.
Correct. Clay Jurgens, I believe it says in the ordinance, if you read the ordinance, it says that the Board of Selectmen will review that ordinance every 2 years.
Yes, it does.
Yes, it does. The Board of Selectmen shall review and approve the point system and every 2 years thereafter. So
Okay.
it's approving your point system again. And it doesn't sound like you're necessarily changing the point system. You're
Correct. We are not.
Selectman Bob Finley. Brian, this is a question for Brian. In a case where you're audited and your auditors are telling you that they don't agree upon the abatement system, have you heard of any other town something or going through that?
personally,
And maybe a recommendation of how to get around that issue.
yeah, personally, it's Brian Leclerc. I have not, but I'll check with my colleagues or other municipalities, and I will dig a little bit deeper to find out what the basis was, what the auditor specifically said, what information they had, and see if we can vet that with them.
I gotta believe that either that's happened before. If you're going to get audited as a town, that might have happened to another town that has a similar.
One would think. One would think. I'm just not aware of it, and we may not have always been made aware of it as town attorneys either for other towns if someone made a policy change like that.
Okay, Selectman Van Hagen, so I'm going to go back to next steps here. Who do we need to get together? We're not the ones who would call together the awards committee. The fire department can do that themselves and kind of re-put forward their concern. Right now, we need to find out, is the next step purely finding out about why we switched off of the tax abatement, if we can go back to that, and if not, how we amend it to fairly give them the value that we had promised them?
Selectwoman Dragon is here. I agree with Rob. I think tonight we have to put a process into place. And I think maybe at our next meeting, we have Doug Thomas here. Because isn't he the one that said we can't do this anymore because of an audit?
It was it was the first selectman and Doug Thomas that informed me of the change.
So I think we really need to look at Doug Thomas and say, well, what can we do? If we promise them $1,000 abatement, but we're giving them cash or a check, but we're really not giving them $1,000.
Mm-hmm.
So we sort of are going back on our word. Would you agree, Selectman?
Yeah, Selectman Van Hagen. Yeah, that being the case, I'd like to know why the change. If it is a change that has to happen for legal fiduciary reasons that we can't do an abatement, it has to be that. Fine. If it was $1,000 abatement, then it should. However, the numbers have to be backed out so that ends up in the final amount.
Right.
But I would still like to understand why we can't do a tax abatement for each person. Again, this is totally separate from the 25-65 issue. Yeah. This is just switching over to that system. I'm sure they had the best of intention to conform, but just didn't realize the way the numbers were going to work out after taxes were taken out and all that. So yeah, that absolutely has to be revisited. The point system in of itself works. I reviewed that. That seemed like fun to fill out at the end of the year. As the year goes on, how many meetings, how many calls, how many trainings. But they're doing that. They're doing their part of upholding that. So we need to see. I'm surprised because this didn't come up last time when we were talking about the 65-25, the fact that it wasn't even an abatement anymore, and it hasn't been for 2 years. So absolutely either finding an actual good reason why we did have to switch to that and making it right going forward in that new system, or hopefully possibly reverting back to an actual abatement system. But yeah, I think Doug, we need to talk to Doug and Kurt about the history of that, where that came from. And then then the totally separate issue of 2565, which I am in favor of. And, we're talking about maybe 20, 25 people. We'll see how that pans out. But the way the abatement goes out, that being, $25,000, $30,000 in abatements for the town based on our budget, I think it's much more impactful for those people than it would be detrimental to the town. So I would very much be in favor of that expansion. And that's all I have to say about that for now.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, it's Brian Leclerc. May I ask Mr. Jurgens one last question?
Yes.
Mr. Jurgens, you suggest in your letter that 65-year age, 25 years of experience, and then you have a line maintaining some activity within the department. If this body amends the ordinance to allow for an additional abatement for those firefighters who have the 25 years of service, how would you suggest some level of activity be handled? By that same committee internally rather than by the ordinance itself trying to define what that means? Because the state statute doesn't have that as a requirement, but we could always impose that. I just didn't know what you were thinking on that.
Clay Jurgens, yes. It was one of the discussions that Kurt Miller and I had, and he requested that people be active in the fire department, and their activity would be recorded along the same lines as the daily activities of the active firefighters. They could be added into the same program, and their activities could be monitored through the year on the same format that they do right now for all the active firefighters.
They would just have, it's Brian Leclerc again, they would have different activities that would count as points, perhaps not going to a fire, but doing something at the station instead, I guess.
Correct.
Selectman Dragonis here. Did we go back to the 65-25, or are we done with the abatement issue? And now on to 65-25, because we had some questions on the 65-25. So are we done with the abatement and the lack of that? Okay. So Clay, on the 65 with a minimum of 25 years service, not able to actively participate in the day-to-day operations, we know that they have to do something else, but I think that this has to have a little bit more teeth on it. We want to do the 65-25 because we want to give to those who have put in their time and thank them so much for all the years of service they have given us. But we also want to be able to make sure that it only applies to property that they or their spouse owns and has to be used on properties here. So we want to make sure that we're not just giving them a $1,000 check or a $500 check, because it has to be for properties here. If they're living in California and still own properties here, how are they doing the community service? And would it be possible to have it tied in from the time that, say, they were juniors, where they're doing stuff, working? The juniors are serving breakfast. The juniors are attending drills. The juniors are helping out some. Is there a way that we can include their time plus the probation time that they're doing, the probie time that they're doing, plus the time they're doing? Are we able to do it that way? It just needs to have more teeth to say, listen, it's only for Seymour residents only. Doesn't matter if you did 25 years in Stratford and 2 years here. It has to be 25 years in the Seymour emergency management. 25 years in Seymour, not 10 in Seymour, 5 in Oxford, 5 in Shelton. 25 years in a Seymour emergency management, be it Citizens, Great Hill, the ambulance, but it has to be a Seymour, Connecticut emergency management, nothing else. So it has to be that type. It has to be used on properties that are registered or listed to Seymour, Connecticut. Because I feel with this abatement tax, if we are giving the firefighters or the ambulance or whomever all a check, right? Selectmen, if we're giving a check, then they're able to use that property tax, that check to use for anything, be it property tax in Connecticut, be it property tax in Massachusetts or Florida or wherever they're using it. It's really not helping us. It's helping them, but they're having to pay a tax on it. I don't think that's what that purpose is for. Yes.
Agreed. We can add the word as long 25 years in Seymour Fire Department, or that's not a problem, or 25 years Seymour Fire Department / Seymour EMS. That is not a problem. I mean, this was basically written by the fire department here in the town of Seymour for the people who had participated in the tax abatement program for 25 years and have now retired or not able to participate anymore. That is the intention.
Mm-hmm.
We do have people, one member in particular who does not live in town, but participates as far as our historian and a lot of other things he does for the town, but he doesn't live here. So, I mean, we kind of worded it that way because he's definitely doing a lot of work for the town of Seymour with reference to the historical nature and historical records for the Seymour Fire Department. So, I mean, you know, we kind of had to include him. That's why we worded it that way. But we can add fire department. It's not a problem. I mean, this was only just a draft to get a discussion going here to figure out what we needed to do. It had to come to you for wording. That's why we did that.
Selectman Van Agen here. Okay, so I understand, which for that one historian, that person who's outside of the town, the check system that you guys are dealing with right now works to his favor than if it was a straight abatement. But if I recall correctly, wasn't there also, or something about that there was something at the discretion, but that might have had to do with a different part of it. I was going to say, if an exception can be made for a specific, for like one person in a special consideration, but for the ordinance itself to read, as Anne Marie really stressed, Seymour 25 years, and for properties in Seymour. So I'd rather have something very clear about everything staying in Seymour with the ability to make a case-by-case exception for a case like that person who's moved out of town.
Selectwoman Dragonis, I agree with that. We could put we could make an exemption on a case-based basis, and it would be reviewed by that abatement committee.
Exactly.
Correct. And I mean, you know, this is discussion. I mean, I'll take it back to the commissioners who have, you know, let them decide. And do you want the commissioners to come up with a different wording or a more concise wording and get back to you? How do you want to do this?
I would like, Selectman Dragonis here, I would like the commissioners to come up with more concise wording. I would also like for them to, because this is coming from the commissioners. This is not something the Ordinance Committee thought of to put into place. This is coming from you. So I would like the commissioners to have a meeting to discuss the exact wording you want to use, you know, using this very strict Seymour residents, Seymour Fire Department, with the ability to make
Case by case.
A case by case, and the case by case would be looked at and viewed upon by your abatement committee.
Okay.
And
Madam Chairman, it's Brian Leclerc. You had a question about a junior, I think you referred to, a young
Yeah,
member of the
we have-
department.
Yes,
And I
I'm
have,
sorry.
yeah, I think I have an answer for you because the statute that empowers this abatement talks about at least 25 years of service as a volunteer firefighter. And firefighter is defined by the statutes as a uniformed member of a paid municipal, state, or volunteer fire department. So I guess that would be a question for the chief. Is a junior a uniform member of a volunteer fire department and therefore a firefighter under the statutes? I don't know the answer to that, but that's the answer to your question regarding juniors.
Commissioner Jurgens, are they considered a uniformed
Uniform member of the department.
a unified member department?
They are overseen by the department, by a group of advisors who actually do that. I believe they are technically part of the fire department. But for 25 years of service at the age of 65, if you were a junior, you'd have 50 years of service in the department. It's kind of a moot point.
True, true. That's a good point.
And when you leave the junior program and you come into either Great Hill or Citizens, you do not get years of service from the age of 14 to the age of 18 when you were a junior. You don't come in with 4 years of service in the fire department. You start with a 0. You start probation. When you finish your probation, your probationary time is added to your active time. It's backed.
Oh, okay.
So it's not probationary, it's not discounted from your time and years of service in the department or company.
Okay, that makes sense. If you're not counting, if you count their probationary time as time counted towards theirs, that's fine. And I didn't even think about the juniors being 50 years as opposed to that. Yeah, that makes sense.
okay.
Okay, so on the 65-25, it's getting kicked back to the commissioners, and the commissioners will meet before our next meeting in October to
When
come
is your
back. October. Rory? I think it's October 6th. Nope, October 5th.
The next
That's
board.
only a week. October 19th. I'm
Okay,
looking. I don't think we can have a meeting next week, can we, guys?
Why not?
What's Brian
not?
Leclerc? Legally, you could if you called a special meeting.
Okay. Selectman Finley?
Yeah, I think I'm okay. Yep. I'm still
Clay,
okay.
does that give you enough time to get with your committee?
I can get a workshop and I should be able to get them together and see if we can talk about this. I will make a best attempt. For the 19th or next week?
This is Van. She's saying for next week. But how much time do we need, Rory, to call a special meeting? Because could we wait until you know, Commissioner Jurgens, if you can get them together and get that language in it? And if you can't, then it gets pushed to the 19th. But if you can, then we can get it moving for something next week.
It's Brian Leclerc, special meeting, 24 hours notice. Just to let you know, the 19th is 3 weeks from tonight. Next week would be the week of the 5th.
I know, normally we meet, Selectman Draganis here, normally we meet the Monday before our Tuesday meeting, so we can report to the selectmen.
Correct.
That's why I said the 5th or the 19th.
Okay.
Selectman
I
Finley,
will-
I'm not going to be able to attend the 19th if we hold it that day, just so you're aware.
Well, we could even do the 12th, we can do the week before. There's nothing in writing, I don't believe, that states that we have to meet the Monday before the meeting.
Actually, we met.
Today.
So you know what? Why don't we just make it the 12th of October 12th, Rory?
Is that a holiday? I guess it doesn't matter if we're meeting remotely. Is that Columbus Day? I don't know what
No,
Columbus
it is Columbus Day.
I mean, I'm okay with meeting it that day. Up to the team.
Well, I'm fine with meeting on the 12th. Van Egan froze. So why don't we, Clay, I think if we give you until the 12th of October, and we also give the assessor until the 12th of October, I think that might work for us. It might
Okay.
give everybody enough time.
Clay Jurgens, I will do my best. I will contact them all tonight, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. And I will be here for the 12th for your meeting.
Okay. So let's just move that into the 12th, and the fire commissioners will come back to us with a little bit of a tighter ordinance. Is everybody good on that one?
Good. I mean, something about Finley.
Right. Thank you, Clay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Clay.
You're welcome.
We lost Finley. I mean, no, didn't we? Lost Van
Rob.
Egan. Yeah. Okay, the next one on there, number 6, is the noise ordinance. Rob's like, am I the only one that got kicked off? Yes. Guess we'll wait for him to come back on. You have to wait. Noise ordinance is next. What do you have to say about that? I know.
Did
Did
she
you
say
get back
that's
on?
rough? Did she say that's rough?
She said that's rough. Huh? That's rough. That's rough.
Have her identify herself for the record.
Chloe Winchester Dragonis for the record.
Chloe has a middle name. Nice.
Chloe. Chloe says, for the record. Okay. 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 Sit. No one wants to see you. Nope, they don't. They do. You think so? Would you? Hi, Blue.
Oh, you have 2 of them.
I got 2 of them. Yeah, Blue and Chloe. We have 3 of them. Huntsman.
Are they siblings?
Blue is the mom.
Who's my- Very nice.
He's a mommy. Is he getting you back on? Hey, Rory, we lost Van Egan.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
Oh, he's right here now. Just popped in the way.
Where did you go, Rob?
I don't know. It was the oddest thing. It kicked me off, and then it just kept saying unstable network. And you know how sometimes you have a 2.4 or a 5 on your Wi-Fi of the same name?
Yeah.
I went over to the 5, and it kicked on, but that was really weird. Sorry about that. What did I miss? Clay took off?
Yeah. So basically, we told him to come back on. We're going to have a meeting on the 12th.
Okay.
Basically, come back to us with a tighter ordinance.
Okay. 12.
Right? Finley?
Yes. Yeah.
Now we're on noise. We waited for you for noise because we know this is your favorite one.
I love this one. I was talking to my neighbors about it yesterday.
Okay. So the noise, Brian, we gave to Rich to see if he can give us any more information on it.
It's Brian Leclerc. As you know, you have a noise ordinance under 846, which has decibel levels. It has an enforcement mechanism. It has, it's actually, this was written, it's pretty thoroughly written ordinance compared with many of them. And I wasn't sure what you were looking at as a body, what you were trying to get at or address that you believe this ordinance doesn't do right now.
Finley, here's the problem with the ordinance is though it's an enforceability problem, right? How do you enforce it? How do you keep everybody on the level? Do we use, the equipment that you use just to measure decibel levels? You can get into those type of discussions. Shouldn't it be just maybe we allow, a noise up to a certain period of time? That we were kind of looking into different ways of doing it so it was more enforceable. I think that's where our heads were versus trying to measure it and,
Is there a noise versus nuisance way to do this? Sorry, Selectman Van Hagen. Because you can have a situation where, let's say at midnight, I can clearly hear the sounds of ongoing activities in my bedroom with my window closed. Now, those are not exceeding 80 decibels, but I shouldn't be able to hear clear speech of someone as if I had my TV or radio on. So that's a nuisance and a time issue. Would that be a separate ordinance, or does that get an extension into a noise ordinance?
Well, your ordinance now, it's Brian Leclerc, does have hours in it, nighttime hours defined already.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just see something here. So,
but if it's in terms of decibels, and after 11 o'clock, the decibels are not sufficient to trigger, to be blocking that, it's kind of...
yeah, I know what you're saying. I know, because right now it's defined in those nighttime hours in a residential zone, you have to stay below 80 decibels, I believe it is. I think that's what the ordinance says. And then nighttime again are 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. Monday through Sunday, 9 p.m. Saturday to 9 a.m. Sunday. You get 2 extra hours Sunday morning. And then no person shall cause or allow an emission of impulse noise in excess of 80 decibels.
Based on whose equipment.
Yeah.
I mean, it just gets into that. Those
You're right. It's hard. You have to have calibrated equipment. You need to have someone in the town who's responsible. It's the police, the health department, someone who has access to the equipment when the noise is occurring in the middle of the night versus, when certain departments are not there. If you have other statutes, remember, if there is a situation where someone is, I'm outside your house shouting at some hour and there's no way to measure it, you could always call the police. I know you have everything from creating a public disturbance to breach of peace to disorderly conduct. So there are some criminal charges as well that are not your local ordinances. I was trying to get my hands around as to what you'd like us to look at or how you might want this written differently.
We're asking if there was any other towns that we could look at as examples for things like that address it.
I didn't see any. I did a quick search. I can dig a little deeper. It's hard to deal with noise. It's always a problem. It's always a problem because you hear that motorcycle go by loud, which I hear this all the time. But then how do you get the noise meter to do something about it? How do you grab that noise meter?
And it's in that area for a period of time too. So if it drives by your house loud, that's that instant time versus somebody just sitting in their driveway revving up the motor, right? There's two different, it's time based as well. I don't know.
You have to catch the individual. It's not like a construction, we've had municipalities with construction projects where they're grinding into rock and they have that noise, sounds like a jet plane landing. which is easy because it's for hours every night, all night, or someone with a quarry pounding away. That's different because it's as opposed to the isolated instances.
We were just trying to make it more effective because it's just very difficult to even to implement. I mean, to monitor and measure and enforce.
It's hard because you'd have to have certain conduct that is prohibited. So what is that prohibited conduct? You know, how do you define that prohibited conduct, whether it be noise, without, you know.
Can you use the word sustain? I'm using probably the wrong term, but sustained, or, you know, that gives it a
Long duration.
duration based.
Without a decibel is me talking in the street, you know, enough versus me screaming in the street outside one of your windows. I guess we'd have to come up with a way to define that too. But then it goes to decibel levels again.
Yeah.
Becomes the issue. That's why these are tough.
And you can't remove decibels from it because my perception of what's annoying compared to Brian's or Anne Marie's or Bob's are going to be very different. And then you'll have somebody who just says, I'm annoyed, and then nobody can make any sound near that house. And we can't get into that.
You'd have neighbors using that if they don't like their neighbor for something else that, you know, it could become problematic. Enforcement.
Their TV is too loud. I can hear it. Well, their window is open and your window is open, but their TV is too loud. So where do we, if we can't use decibels, what do we use?
I mean, well, you know, if construction is the issue, we can look at prohibiting construction after certain hours and then coming up a way to define that except in an emergency situation, if that's the problem.
But we already have that.
Yeah, or if it's typically, I don't know if you have one for lawn services, you can't mow your lawn. I mean, some towns will put those type of ordinances because that's a defined activity.
We even have it so that the trash cannot be hauled before 6 o'clock in the morning.
Right, right. So you can go after those individual activities, but.
Well, then, Selectman Van Hagen here, let's bring this back a bit then. What problem, what issue that our citizens have are we trying to solve? Is there a log of complaints that we get? If it's 99% of it is, you know, the motorcycles that go through this particular street at 2 o'clock in the morning are way too loud. Okay. I think right now we're just kind of trying to solve too big of an issue without, I think we got to narrow it down. What are the biggest offenders? Like Anne Marie said, you know, the garbage truck picking things up at 1 o'clock in the morning, unacceptable. So that's been changed. What else? What are the other issues that we have? Is it
hot tamales having bands outside has been an issue, where people in that area are calling up early, like very early, and saying they hear noise, right? So that could be some of it.
Early, like 5, 6?
Like 8 o'clock, you know, where they are allowed to have activity there till I think it's 11 or whatever the.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean it's.
Now, unfortunately, because of COVID, you have the bands outside, which makes it work. I mean, so some of it could be because of the situation we're in as well. And that's the same thing for Pub 67. The doors there, the noise will carry across that pond, and they'll hear it on the opposite side of that pond. It's unfortunate of where it's situated. The music's actually situated and where it projects out, right? So those are the things that we want to have our businesses to be. We want our business to be able to have events like that, but to balance that with the residents around them.
Which I could tell you, some of the places from what I can hear outside, I don't understand how anybody inside of the building hasn't gone completely deaf.
Well, it's like it's worse too because nothing's inside now, so it's even worse. Now winter's going to come and that's all going to slow down and stop. but then we'll run into spring and summer and same problem's gonna happen.
Yeah. I hate to say it, but I think decibels are the way to go, and the part of it is having calibrated machines with perhaps especially if we're going to say that let's say the two big issues are residents near Tamales and Pub 67.
Yeah.
There to be, and how we implement this and the costs, that's going to be the real crux of it. But the idea of saying we're going to have, Rion data loggers that are going to measure decibel levels for a 12-hour period from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. And, we're going to have two of them added towards each location. And we're going to see what a typical Friday and Saturday night what those decibel levels are like. Be interesting to couple that with what kind of complaints come in. I can tell you when we're doing vibration monitoring for blasting, amazingly, the people where we put the seismographs on now report that the blasting is significantly lower than it was before we set up a seismograph. It's because now the blasters are taking it easy because you're there. Even though we were 3 houses down for the previous one, and we know the readings weren't that high. So, just knowing that there's going to be monitoring happening. Also, what kind of communication is happening with those venues? Are they working with the town, with residents? Because, I know every now and then, the call goes to the cops, not to Hot Tamales to say, hey, could you turn it down a bit? It's the police will be the ones who have to show up or give them a call and ask them to turn it down a little bit.
I guess you'd have to look at your zoning. It's Brian Leclerc, your zoning regulations as well, to see if those are permitted uses in those zones. Just because they have music outside, we could take a look at the regs to see whether they're allowed to have music outside.
Mm-hmm. Which I wouldn't want to take away from anybody right now, considering the state of things. If anything alters so that we can make sure they can do it outside.
I want to encourage other restaurants come to our town versus discourage them from coming to our town.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe if they all gave vouchers to their neighbors, that would calm things down. I don't know how to answer this one right now. It may not be an excessive decibel thing, but it's a nuisance and a time issue. And I think maybe we have to try to maybe talk to the police and see, the biggest offenders are, as Bob said, the two restaurants with the outdoor music. And then just kind of center around that and see what we can do.
Yeah, this is Bob. I just don't want to pin it just to that, but I just know those are cases. I know there are issues.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Understood. I think maybe a study, and I, like I said, I have two Rion data loggers that'll do long-term volume studies. I'd have no problem deploying for free to put out just to get some data and see what it's actually like in those. And if that fails, I know everybody has got an app on their phone where they can check random decibels. I don't know how accurate that is, though.
Yeah, you need the runtime. You need the runtime. That static, I just put it on for a second. What you need is sustained time, logged periods of time, so you can prove high decibels for long periods of time. Mm-hmm. That's why the time and duration is important to me, because you're going to hear loud noises occasionally, and people got to get used to that in life. But if it's going to sustain and be a duration, that's going to be a problem. That's what you want to address.
Yeah, chainsaw versus running a machine for 3 hours.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So what's our next step?
So say we say that the police are in charge of it, right?
Okay.
Are they going to come with a decimal reader past 10 o'clock or past 11 o'clock and say, you got to turn it down?
It'd be nice so we could have data, but they would probably just ask them to turn it down.
Right.
Or stop
It's
playing.
gonna be as simple as I sent the police officer and we told them to reduce the noise.
That's why I'd love to see it, because Pub 67, I've heard it get significantly quieter, which means somebody made a complaint, somebody called, which almost makes me say I'd love to see their soundboard. It'd be so neat if you could just put a little stick-it right there that says, just don't go past that. That's sufficient.
Yeah.
Every time you go past that, you get complaints. So just keep it there.
Yeah,
But-
too bad I couldn't put a little sticky there. I was just looking to see what else we had. What else can we do? Can we make the bars put in sound readers? Put it onto them? Listen, if you want to have these bands play, then, and it's just a suggestion, then have them have the readers there. And once it gets this time and it gets past this note, then it's on you to make sure that it's lowered.
There are businesses that when they're going to have large mechanical machines, they are required, by states, by OSHA and all that, to
Yep.
show that they're not exceeding so many decibels for such a duration, because you have to wear certain types of protection based on the decibel and the duration. Like
Yep.
Bob said, short duration, you just need a little earplug. You're going to be next to this machine for 4 hours. You need something more robust. So the idea, and also kind of to protect themselves, you guys do this, prove that you're staying under, and that way anytime somebody complains, we're more apt to say, hey, they're staying under, sorry, it's a little bit of a nuisance, but this is the give and take that we have for them to have business and things to continue. I don't know how well that would go over. Another regulation, another cost to put on.
I know.
So now perhaps we can look at some sort of private-public partnership with a company that does sound level reading. Something where they could contract with the town to go kind of in an as needed, do sporadic sound studies around. Maybe something we could look to get a grant for.
Oh, good idea.
I think before we would do that, the Selectman Finley, I think we have to understand how many calls are the police getting in an average weekend night.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a lot of effort, right? If we're only getting 3 calls, I think we'd want to quantify how large of a problem we really have.
3 calls from the same person.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, from the same restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
Rory, do you have any of that information?
I mean, I can only speak to the calls that, typically most people, will call the police, and I can't really speak to what their call volume or where they're originating from. The ones that reach us are really a mix. We have people who file complaints because they live next to industrial properties, and the industrial activities, generate noise on a regular basis. We have people who complain about the restaurants with live music. There are neighbor disputes. I recall one about, a neighbor was regularly operating a dirt bike on their property. These are the reasonable ones, but point being, you have residential, you have commercial, you have, a variety. But I can't speak to the volume for each.
Okay. Is that information we can get with the police records? I'm going to say search. Is that information they could give us? How many of those calls were noise complaints in a given year? I would think that they keep pretty good records.
Yeah, I'll send an email over to the police department. I imagine they would have that kind of information, and we can certainly find out.
Okay. I think that would really help going forward.
The Selectman Bob Finley, is there a financial penalty when they over the ordinance?
In the current ordinance we have?
Yeah.
Yes, there is. It's a, I got it right. I think it's $100. Let me just call it up. It is, I have it right here. Here's the exact amount.
And I should have looked that up, but
No, it's right. I got it right. Penalties. Chief of may issue a written warning. First, you may issue a written warning. Blah blah blah. Any person in violation shall be fined in the amount of $100. Each day such violation continues. Continuing violation doubled each day, up to a maximum of $400 per day.
it doesn't sound like it's high enough, Brian. I mean, that penalty, if I had a business and $100 would be nothing to pay as a penalty.
Right.
It's what, 100, then 200, then 400, 400, 400.
Correct. You're correct. That's correct.
I don't know. Seems like you'd want to have it larger. If you're gonna have a penalty, it should be larger than that.
You see a difference between residential and commercial?
No different.
I'm saying, would Bob Finley say, let's say 500 residential, 1,000 commercial or something like that? Or 250 residential?
I think it's a good idea, but I think, and I like where we're going with this, but I think that businesses are hurting so bad now that if we were to put this impose a fine now.
Well, if you get your first warning, Anne Marie, then you impose a fine. If you have to come back, if we have to send a cop back, if they're not going to listen, then the fine should be painful. It should be $100.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, this is not a first time offense thing.
You're gonna get a warning. You'll get your first, because the cops aren't going to initiate the fine immediately. Right? You're going to get your warning to give you a chance, and if he has to come back again.
No.
I agree with reviewing the numbers and seeing what we could do to raise those and perhaps a difference between residential and commercial.
Because where you were going, Rob, with commercial is that you're going to have, if it is a machine and it's obnoxiously loud, that individual, that you don't just fix that. You're going to have to put insulation. You're going to have to do something surrounding it to prevent that noise from reaching those decibel levels.
Well, do you invest $3,000 to make it soundproof, or do you pay $100? For every time somebody have 100, then 200, then a 400 a year.
Eventually, those fines equal up past the amount of money that you would have cost to soundproof that machine.
Oh yeah, and it makes sense to soundproof it right off the bat. But
Whatever, pay me now or pay me later, right?
So at this point, this is Selectman Van Hagen. Horrible at saying Selectman Van Hagen. I'm so sorry. So then at this point, we're going to look for what kind of data we have on what the actual volume and, in proximity to what items tends to be, and then consider increasing fines for multiple offenses, correct?
Yes, Selectman Dragonis, I'm awful at doing that too. Brian, could you look at that? I mean, you are at the police commissioner meetings. Is that something that we can get from them?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
You want the complaint history, number of complaints that come in for sound, where they're coming in from, the frequency, addresses, things like that. I think they could pull that off the computer.
Yeah, whatever we could do to better target where we're trying to aim this.
Yeah, they should be able to. I'll talk to the chief about that tomorrow.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I think we've gone as far as we can on the noise ordinance. I'm liking the way this is going because we're talking it out and we're pushing it along. We're making progress each meeting. on each item that we're discussing. And I think we have goals that we're reaching too.
Mhm.
They're achievable. So the next one is discussion and take possible action on other ordinance forwarded by the Board of Selectmen. I don't have any other ordinance. Do you?
I don't remember anything coming forward from our last selectmen meeting.
So 3 of us are sitting there at the last ordinance meeting. Do we remember? At the last Board of Selectmen meeting. So we have the nonprofit, Attorney Leclerc and Joe Kuzak are going to work on an ordinance together and get back to us. For the firefighter abatement, it's sort of a twofold, right? We got to figure out why the firefighters aren't getting their abatement. So we believe that Doug Thomas should come to our next meeting so we can ask him and figure out what we can do to make whole on the promise and on our ordinance that we have set in place. As well as we have Commissioner Jurgen going to speak to his commissioners to tighten up the 65-25 rule with more teeth and more beef in it, coming back to us.
Specifics about scene.
Yeah. Specifics. And then on the noise ordinance, we are going to have Attorney Leclerc go to the police department and see if he can get us more information as to what, where, how often, and if it's just during the summertime. The motorcycles going up and down the road at 2 o'clock in the morning, I mean, really, that's only from spring to fall. And there's really nothing we can do about that. Unless, of course, you live across from a motorcycle club and they're revving their engines all the time. Then we can always look at zoning for that. Is there anything else?
I don't believe so.
Okay. With that, can I have a motion?
On that one, that's where you start to get disturbance of the peace and other vehicles to deal with that issue versus noise ordinance.
Yeah, true. There's nothing else. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Okay. Meeting adjourned at 8:33. Next meeting is October 12th. Rory, do you have